right now, and we'll see how fast he can get up here. So. Here we go. All right. Well, thank you very, very much for being with us. This is the Public Safety Committee. We have one item this afternoon, and it's the Bill 1419, the Police Advisory Commission and the establishment of it. And we have Amanda Myhill here and Susan Farag, both of who will lead us through this. And if you'd like to identify yourself, please.
Good afternoon. I'm Captain Edward Pallas with the Montgomery County Police Department.
Thank you very much. Amanda, are you going to lead us off? Thank you.
I will do as ever you would like. You have before you, as the chair mentioned, Bill 1419. This is the committee's second work session on the bill. The committee had a pretty thorough discussion in September about the specific provisions of the bills and all of the issues that were raised at the public hearing. So I won't walk through all those again, but I will note for you that rather than reprint the entire summary of the packet and the issues that had been presented, I did put an excerpt of my packet from last time that identified all of the different issues that had been raised on circles 40 through 42. And if you'll recall, not all, but a significant number of those issues were addressed by an amendment proposed by the lead sponsor, Councilmember Reamer. Also at the first committee work session, the chair had requested that council staff provide a list of boards, committees, and commissions that, as part of its duties, may make recommendations on policing matters. And Ms. Farag did pull through this list together, and it's attached on Circle 18. And in addition, we wanted to be sure that you knew that the police department consults with some other organizations that, while those organizations don't specifically make recommendations on policing matters to the police department does actually consult with those organizations for best practices. And those organizations are listed in the middle of page 2. But again, the list of BCCs is on Circle 18.
Okay.
As I promised I would do, I have attached additional correspondence that the council has received on Bill 1419. I will say that there were a lot. The council received dozens of emails that were substantially similar in form and requested amendments, and so I didn't attach all of those because the packet would have been quite lengthy, but I did attach a representative sample to the back of the packet. Specifically, the council has received recommendations to incorporate two amendments to Bill 1419. Number one is to add 2 seats on the Commission for Young People, which, as the committee has already discussed, is a proposed recommendation of council members Jawando and Hooker. And second, to specify the composition of the commission would reflect the racial and economic diversity of the county, which would be included in the Reamer amendment that's attached to your packet, but I do have some updated language to talk about when we get to that specific amendment. Additionally, in some letters, the council was urged to add a non-voting member that's an expert in police reform, and I have that as an issue for committee discussion later, but I did just want to summarize that for you. I didn't know if there were any opening comments, or I'm happy to just dive into the issues that I've identified in the packet for your discussion.
Captain, did you have anything that you would like to
Yes, sir.
add? No? Okay, well, first off, so let's go through each discussion as it's written. The individual nominations, I guess, would be the first one, and that's on page 3.
Yes, sir.
Does anybody in the committee just jump in if you're, you never can tell whose light is on, so just hit me if you want to speak. So number 1 would be the individual nominations. As has been no secret, I have had concerns with that from the very beginning. I believe that, and I've used the term politicizes it more than other commissions and committees. I've heard from both sides on that issue. I've heard people that think it's a good idea. I've heard from people that agree that what I'm saying is that they don't think it's a good idea. But I'd like to know what the committee thinks about that, please. Go ahead.
I agree with you, Mr. Chairman. We make a lot of appointments. We don't do anything else I can think of exactly that way. I think it would unintentionally, I understand I think the intention of the suggestion, but I think it does seemingly politicize it or create competition to nominate some of the same people or other unintended consequences. So I would go with your recommendation and not do that.
Okay. I know Councilmember Joando's light is on, but go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Great to be with you all again. And I've spoken on this issue. I think it was based on the Sacramento model, where every council person there, thank you, appointed an individual person. And while I know it would be different in practice from what we normally do with nominations, I think in this instance, because of the issue and the need for the maximum level of transparency and accountability, I think it gives us all a stake in it. We all have to decide what qualifications we think are important. And while I think we all work very well together and we'll talk to each other in either scenario, so I think at the end of the day, I'm hopeful that we can get to a really balanced commission membership. I do think that under the current way we do it, if there were a 5-member majority that thought that a certain perspective of people should be on there, that could decide all of the 9 members. And not saying that will happen, but it could happen. And I think that's why I think it'd be preferential to have every council member be able to appoint a person that they think brings the knowledge, skills, and abilities to forward to the commission. But it's something to consider. I just wanted to restate the reasoning again, why we based it on the Sacramento model, and I appreciate my colleagues' attention to the issue.
Okay. Councilmember Albornoz, please.
So I'll be candid. I've evolved on this since this was initially proposed. I had concerns and objections because of the potential practice or the precedent it would set with other boards and commissions, which I get as an issue. But the other concern I have with this is ensuring geographic diversity of the participants on the commission. And I think having certainly district council members, obviously, but at large as well, I think presents another opportunity for us to ensure that there is that geographic diversity through people we are appointing. And, we're all coming at this from different angles and perspectives, but I think it presents another opportunity for us to identify the makeup of the commission and determine if there is a need in a specific area, maybe somebody with more youth development experience or in another area that I actually feel comfortable with it. And I think that because it's been established as a best practice in Sacramento and there's been some experience with it and evidence that it's working pretty well, I do feel in this case that I agree that having each of us have the opportunity to appoint somebody makes sense.
Okay. Would you, if we had that as, that said the geographic side, if we had that as one of the criteria in order to be considered for the appointment in general, would that be something that would satisfy? Because candidly, if each individual gets to appoint somebody, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get the geographics.
Well, I agree it doesn't necessarily mean it, but I think it puts us in a better position to make sure that that's something that's being considered. So I would still feel comfortable with the amendment as it's been proposed.
Okay. So at this point, I guess it's 2-1 from the committee that we're going to suggest that it be like all the other committees. Is that what I'm hearing correctly? Dick, go ahead.
Thank you, Council Chair, Mr. Katz. You know, I drafted it as the individual appointment. I think there's value in both ways. I like this approach. I think it would be a little different. I think it ensures a kind of ongoing evolution, but I'm sure that council members will nevertheless, you know, the council will advertise very broadly. There will be one pool of applicants that the council members will pull from. So I think in a sense, it will be the same in that it won't be like, you know, hey, one council member just talks to the 4 people that council member knows and then picks from that small group of people that they just want to get on. There's going to be an open public process. And the council will be able to, there'll be transparency to that process. I would assume that the applicants will be public. It's a matter of public record who applies. So I think in either event, we'll have a similar transparent public discussion about it. But this way, it ensures that council members know that, you know, that they have a stake, like they have to follow along and you know, be part of the conversation and have a little skin in the game, as the phrase has been used. I think it could be positive.
Okay. Does that change your opinion?
So then I appreciate all of your arguments. Then how does it work operationally? We take applications, they go in a pool, and then at a public meeting, we say, I want Zoe and you want Pete, and we go down the dais?
If you'd like to speak to it.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can determine that. I think it would just be augmenting our current process. You have nothing would change. People would apply.
Yeah.
Far and wide.
Right.
And then something in our internal processes, we would have to, at some point, publicly say, and it could be a conversation that happens behind the scenes as it does now on who we appoint, but at some point, the public needs to be notified that Councilmember Hucker appoints X person, Councilmember Jawando appoints Y person, and that is made public. And individual council members could say more on their own, as I'm sure many would, about why they thought the youth development or geographic diversity, whatever is important to that individual council member. I just think, again, we could figure that part out as far as how it's announced, but it would need to be publicly announced at some point, whether when the appointments are made or at some point prior to that.
And then how do you resolve conflicts if 3 council members want to nominate the same person?
Well, I think the same way we would resolve a conflict if that was the case of we all wanted to nominate this person under the normal system. We would talk about it, say, hey, well, there's another great person here. Why did you want to do that? We would have a discussion about it. I think that person would be on, and then we would have to decide what was your secondary, because in any scenario, we're going to have multiple people that we probably would appoint if we had. Yeah. If I had all 9 appointments, I could fill it out, you know? So I think we'd probably have a second and third choice, then we could work it out.
First off, you're assuming, though, that everybody would see the same pool. I mean, if I said, look, I'm concerned, I want to make certain that somebody who lives, works, whatever, in the 3rd district is on this, but you might have already picked somebody from the 3rd district and I didn't know it. I mean, so it would be so very different from everything we're doing. And go ahead, jump in.
Well, I just wanted to, Tom asks a good question, asks a good question. Line 14 of the bill, Circle 2. So each council member should nominate 1 member. Mm-hmm. If I read that, I would interpret that as the council as a whole must still approve the member or confirm the member.
They would be appointed by the council.
They're still appointed by the council as a whole, but nominated by.
Okay, but what happens, how do we know, first of all, you nominated person X. Well, I mean, I don't know that I would have known that person X even applied. I mean, unless we all saw the same pool at the same time. So nobody.
I think that's very important, that the pool is public.
Okay.
All see the same.
So everybody, so that would even be a little different from what we're in the nominations too. I mean, we don't always see everybody's name that applied. I mean, you know, we
can.
Well, we can, I understand. Well.
So the pool's discussed at a public meeting. And then maybe it's totally fine. It feels like I'd want to avoid the awkwardness of feeling like, you know, you're picking teams in JV. And, you know, if the last person at the dais has to decide between, you know, the person they're picking and the two very qualified people that are getting left out, and explaining that when everybody else just picked people who everybody kind of agreed on. And if I'm at the end of the dais, I don't know these people, but I'm having to just sort of choose, and there's two people feeling left out or whatever.
Or you could
on
have the
TV.
same, or you could have the same problem as saying, you know what, I know that there's these two people left. I don't know either one, therefore I'm going to hold this up until I can actually get till I know, meet with them directly. I mean, would you interview each person? I don't know how you do this. I just believe that if we did it the way we've been doing it forever, that we're still going to end up, similar to what many of you were saying, you're still going to end up with a good committee, which is the most important part of this whole process. You're going to get people, if you see on the list that there's, and maybe we could put in there that it has to be you have to have someone that's associated with either a business or a residential a person living in the district. You have to have somebody from each district. All of these things that are so necessary, I just don't believe it should be from an individual appointment. I understand we're all supporting all the individual appointments, but that's what I'm concerned. Go ahead, Will.
Appreciate it. And I think, as with all things, it would be different. We have to figure out a new process. I would want to avoid the JV pick, having been on the bad end of that in my life. I wasn't always a good basketball player. Sometimes I was the last person seated as the chubby kid. But I think, look, right now, currently, we have a lot of behind-the-scenes conversation. Who's going to meet the threshold to make it even to get an interview, for example, for various appointments. So I think there would have to be some conversation before we get to the point of appointments about that. There would be a date when the pool closes, 100 people apply, or whatever it is. I hope there's great interest. And then we'll all have that list, or, say it's, 20 people apply, and we'll go through it, and then we'll have some, individual conversations. What's important to you? What are your priorities? And then I think we'll come out with a list. But I think at the end of the day, for the public's transparency and accountability, knowing that I appointed someone for these reasons, and that's my appointment, and that's why I think it's better for the public to be able to say, I know where people stand, and they have to articulate why they've appointed X person. That's one of the benefits, in my view, to the public.
Except the public won't see the behind the scenes.
Right, that's it. I don't believe we're being as transparent as we're saying if we're doing it that way, candidly. Anyhow, so I haven't changed my opinion, but where are you?
I bet we're going to be talking about this in full council.
Okay, well, we should. I mean, I have no problem. This is for the committee, yeah.
I don't feel super strongly about this, but I don't exactly understand. I hear you about, we'll figure this out in the future, but I like voting on stuff where I kind of know how it's going to work, too.
The actual process. I mean, there is no, to be candid, Tom, there's no really articulated process on the threshold for who gets an interview with our current nominations.
Oh, I'm not going to defend our current system.
I
For me, I don't like it.
So I don't know if this will be helpful to the discussion. The way the council has just a handful of BCCs that they actually make the appointments to. Most of the time, the advisory committees, you just get a list of people the executive is appointing, and you just confirm them. My understanding of the way that the council process is it is advertised, people apply, those applications are public, council members get a list, they indicate who they'd like to interview, and then there are interviews in typically the committee of jurisdiction. And then from there, this is what I'm not privy to, from there you all decide who you want to appoint. I'm not trying to put words in anybody's mouth, but I presume that a similar process would follow, which is you would solicit for applicants, they would apply, everyone would get the list, and then you would choose, if you do this individual nominations, you would individually choose which person you wanted to get.
Well, and then we have the extra little layer here, because the county executive has, and we're going to have to get to this a little later too, but the county executive would have 4 appointments the way this is being proposed, 2 of which, more than likely, are going to be for the people a person under 25 or whatever. We have some discussion about that, and the 35. So
there's some precedent, not the youth part of it, but there's some precedent for that as well, because the Charter Review Commission, for instance, is 11 commission members, 5 of which are appointed from a list that the executive sends over. He frankly sends over 5 names, and we appoint those, and then the others are chosen by the council. So there is, in that respect, the appointing authority is still the council, but there is some precedent for that mix.
And just to be clear, if I could.
Go ahead, sure.
Everyone applies, we get the list, we check, as opposed to checking who we want to interview, we're going to be checking who we would like to nominate, whatever conversation we have. Yeah, and you get one person. And then that will be compiled by the clerk, similarly like they would compile the votes of who would move forward for an interview, right? And then, obviously, if there's one person that has 9 council members, then there's going to have to be a subsequent.
Ranked choice voting.
Right.
And go to number 2 and go to number 3, right?
So something, yeah, that's one way to do
I mean,
it.
that might be fine.
Do you mind if I just join the conversation?
Just
So,
jump in. This is the way
I
we're
was
gonna
assuming that it would be a little more, we advertise for it's obviously going to be a bigger issue the first time we are appointing the whole
Yeah,
commission.
absolutely, but we got to worry about the first time here.
Right. So we advertise for the position, for the commission. We get 30 responses. Councilmember Joanno feels really strongly about someone that he wants to nominate. He also has a couple other people he thinks would really be good. You know, Councilmember Reamer doesn't have any strong views and listens to Councilmember Joanno and says, yeah, I like what you're saying. I'm going to nominate one of the people that you couldn't nominate.
I like that scenario, by the way.
Right, I'm sure you would. And then, and I think it would just kind of, I think we would honestly be more likely to have a challenge filling the commission with people that we all really felt strongly were qualified and were great. You know, I don't know that we're going to be inundated with so many people that were, but we'll see. Who knows? And then so it sort of goes around like that. Like Councilmember Albornoz has someone that he's clear about. Councilmember Hucker is, isn't as fixated on one person and has a couple that he's choosing from. And then at the end of the day, we all land upon your one nomination. But it turns out that nobody likes Councilmember Katz's. And so.
And I don't like your suggestion on that, but go ahead.
Exactly. I'll use nobody likes Reamers.
Yeah, no, that I like.
Exactly. We can all agree on that. And so I decided, well, I better pull that back because I don't have 5 votes,
And I hear you, but if we're going to have these good conversations, transparent, good conversations, then we should just have them. And I believe that we work well enough together that most people are going to say, okay, let's all good points have been made. That person should be on this commission. And you're right, it's going to be for the first one. I mean, at some point, we don't have to go through this process to the same degree each time. And once we feel comfortable with the process, there again, we can move on. We can talk round and round. This is for the committee recommendation. I'm still comfortable with what I said originally. I don't know if you are. So where are you on this?
I'm prolonging the discussion.
You like to prolong the conversation? Okay.
But I think I'm answering my own question. So if
Yeah.
you had, we all get to vote, get 5? Because we're supposed to be just nominating one, or choosing one.
Right.
But you said 5 a minute ago.
So he was saying that nomination doesn't mean confirmation. He was just distinguishing that I can put forward whomever I like, but if that person doesn't achieve.
But if now I'm playing staff person. If I were staffing this process and I gave each council member 5 ranked choice votes, right? Each one being a point. Then whoever had the most points would obviously make it, right? And it would be clear who's going to have enough points to get the votes of the full council, right?
Yeah.
But you'd be able to nominate somebody. Everybody would have a first choice, but everybody's first choice wouldn't necessarily make it on.
You could
I
have.
wasn't, yeah.
No, that'd be the way to do it because
You're evolving this, so I wasn't necessarily assuming that it would be a system like that, but it would rather be.
I'm answering
Camilla
my
has
question
to
about
walk around
disputes. I'm
and
still
get
stuck on the
5 votes.
disputes. What if you, Will, and I all want the same person?
Well, we have
Who gets
work
to
it out.
choose?
We just have to work it out amongst ourselves. It turns out.
Well, that's what you're saying, but then that's not transparent.
Well, at the end of the day, you've appointed somebody. It's transparent to the extent that this person is associated with a choice that was made by you, or by me, or by
Okay.
Tom,
Well,
or by
how do we
Hans.
work it
The other issue, another way to go, and I think you think this is the Sacramento model. And
I guess it would be up to maybe that candidate could decide that who they would like to have appoint them.
well, no, I don't
This
think we
shouldn't
would do
be
that.
the
I don't think we'll
voice.
do that.
I mean, you don't get to figure out which team you're
Yeah,
on.
mine was saying that it was actually not it was an appointment that every council member would be able to appoint whomever they chose, like not a nominate. So that I don't care if I don't like Councilmember Katz's person, he gets to put that.
You get
person.
your own.
And so we all kind of are agreeing, we're saying that, and if we pass this,
So then,
that you're allowed to
who
put your
decides the
person.
order, though? Because you have, say, 18 nominees, we all get one pick, but you've just picked mine, and
Well, then you
got
gotta
my
go on
second
the
choice,
list.
and Sydney picked my third choice. Now I'm down to my fourth choice.
Right.
Which, maybe that's okay.
I think that's
But the way to operationalize that is I would send in 5 names and rank them.
And then the issue becomes, if you didn't like my appointment, I mean, let's go back to that, then does that mean that I get to come back and say, okay, you didn't like my first appointment, I'm the only person that gets to nominate my slot for any of the appointments? I mean, even if there was, well, why not? If everybody else gets their own appointment, then, and you're saying everybody gets an appointment, and you knock out mine,
I don't think we would not get.
well, but I'm just saying, if either the whole council gets to vote on the entire list, or you're saying it really is only being appointed by one council member, and that's been my concern all along, that really does politicize the system. It's not like the checks and balances are there. So that's my whole problem with this, doing it that way. I really sincerely believe that we're going to end up with extremely good people. And that's not the problem. It's the system how we get people there.
I think the view of, I agree with you, we'll have a lot of qualified people, but I think there are varying views. I've said this many times. We are in a moment where we're trying to figure out what 21st century policing is. And there's a lot of viewpoints on that. And whom you might appoint is probably going to be different from whom I might appoint. Sure. And Tom and Hans and the same. And I think that variation of viewpoints is important. The process of whether it's ranked choice or whether we just kind of have an agreement that, barring some sort of conflict of interest or totally unqualified person, I know we're going to look at, they have to have some experience, that we are going to go along with whomever the council member thinks they should put forward. I'm flexible on that piece of it, but the premise I think is still important, that we need the diversity, not only geographic, but viewpoint, outlook, background,
All of that should be
experience,
listed.
and all that.
I agree with every one of those, but that should all be listed for the entire group. Anyhow, whenever you're ready to tell me what you're going to do, please.
It's not I hope you don't, it's your committee member that
No, I
appreciate.
understand. No,
I
and
hope
we're
he
going to have the same
reconsiders.
good conversation at full council, and should. That's the transparent way to do things.
I mean, I still wouldn't do it that way, I think, because to me, it feels like we're doing it because I want the credit with somebody. I feel like what you want is to say, we want some guarantee or assurance that you're going to have some people on the committee that agree with your priorities, and then they're not going to get drowned out by a narrow majority of 5 that just get to pick all 9, essentially. And I don't think that'll happen, and I think we could do it the way I'm talking about with 5 choices ranked, but I wouldn't prefer it to do it that way, so I guess I'm 2-1. I'm sure we're going to talk about this in full council.
Okay. We're still at 2-1, unless you'd like to switch with us. No, I'm kidding. Go ahead, yeah.
So for clarity's sake,
Yes, yeah. Why would you want that? Yeah. What?
just from the technical aspect, the majority of the committee is recommending the amendment that is in the middle of page 3, removing the final sentence that says each council member should nominate 1 member. The effect of that is basically the standard process that the council uses to appoint
Right.
its committees.
Right. Okay, we're going to go to number 2. Hans, can you cut off your light, please? Thanks. But I don't mind everybody jumping in for these discussions, because just calling on people doesn't seem to be as effective on these types. All right, so number 2 is the council should appoint 9 public members with an interest. 1 person with the interest is a police expert. But there's no definition of the word police expert.
Yeah, the council received a request to incorporate an amendment that specified that there should be 1 non-voting member that is a police expert. I would note that the language of the bill, as well as the amendment by Councilmember Reamer that we'll talk about in a minute, already requires that the people appointed to the commission have an interest in policing matters. I'm certainly not, the staff comments is that I'm certainly not opposed to this, but I sincerely don't know what a police expert is. I tried to do some research on it, and there was no clear definition. I don't know I don't know if Captain Palace knows if there is any sort of definition of what an expert in police reform is. I couldn't find one, but that's just me. So that was my concern with this amendment.
There again, for the listing of, for people who we would appoint or nominate, appoint, however that works out, I think that should be something on the listing that, and there again, what I consider a police expert and what somebody else considers a police expert, and in many cases it's self-professed. I mean, it's, it's not like you are a certified police expert. So as far as I'm concerned, it's something to be considered. It's something that should be on the list, but I don't know that we could say that that's the criteria for that position. Anybody else on that one, please? The sound of silence, does that mean we're good? We're good? Sure.
I will be sharing some language in a moment that has, calls for members that have a reflect a range of ethnicities, socioeconomic status.
Right.
Maybe it's written in there. There was a clause there that said also have an interest or expertise in policing matters. I have to confess, I would think that applying for the commission would demonstrate some interest in policing matters.
Right.
And I don't know how you'd really, I think maybe it would signal to the council that, hey, don't appoint people who don't have a true interest here, who haven't some track record. But I don't know if there would actually be any real standard to it. I think it's just more about setting an expectation.
Well, and then you run into the problem, and we're going to, we always seem to be jumping ahead on this thing, but everybody knows what the listing is. Then you run into a problem if somebody who's between the age of 18 and 25, they might not have a track record, but you want to hear from them. So it's those types of concerns. So at this point, it's a 3-0 that we're going to list that as one of the.
That you're not going to specify.
Not specify, but it should be listed, and we're going to come up with for Hans's suggested language, and maybe we should be adding some additional things to that suggested language, and that would be, as far as I'm concerned, that could be one of the. He's saying have an interest or expertise in policing matters. We can add some additional things, and I also think we should say, because we don't have in that listing, or it's not being suggested yet, but in that listing about geographics. Okay.
So,
Go ahead.
did you want to move on to the next?
Well, I can. I think we have a 3-0, unless anybody else wants to jump in. I mean, they're not a shy group, but anyhow.
Well, there's no motion actually.
Well, we're not. Well, we're.
That wasn't a part of the bill, right?
Right.
You're not including.
Yeah.
But you're right.
So without an affirmative vote from the committee, that a non-voting member, a non-voting ex officio member for policing expertise is not going to be added to the bill.
Will would like to.
And I'll just say, I think if I remember the impetus from the folks who've been writing in about this, it was that they wanted to have a balanced, someone who had the gravitas and understanding of law enforcement personnel, someone on that commission to speak with some authority on the issue. I think that's a great criteria, and I think those people will be on the commission. I certainly will be looking for whatever the process is to nominate someone who has that background. So I can't imagine a scenario when there isn't somebody
I agree.
who's on there that brings that to the commission. So I don't, and with the trouble of defining it, I think we should just stay away from it. But I do want to say just publicly, I think the underlying issue is an important one, and I think there will be members, multiple, who either work at national criminal justice organizations or have background that can bring that perspective.
And in fact, maybe even we should figure out for the application process itself, we should have a listing that says this is what we're looking for or whatever, so that, and that be listed as one of the things that we look for. And they can explain why they are an expert. I mean, rather than just say I'm an expert, Okay, are we good on that? So it's a 3-1, a 3-0. The next one was the union representative.
could summarize this real easy if you'd like me to, Chair.
Please, absolutely. Easy works with me. Easy's very good with me.
This is mostly a technical correction. The way that the bill was introduced is it specified that the council needed to appoint as a non-voting ex officio member, a representative of an employee organization. It was always what I understood the intent of the bill, that the employee organization, which is the FOP, would nominate its own member and the county would, or the council would appoint that person. There was some question about that from the executive branch, and so I've suggested a clarifying amendment on the top of page 4 to make it clear that the non-voting ex officio member is the president of, in this case it's the FOP, but the president of the employee organization or the president's designee, which is consistent with how we typically identify these appointees.
I'm fine with that. Are you fine with your, so that's, go ahead, anybody want to jump in?
I'm not opposed to that. I think it's the
Okay.
right way to do it. There has been some consternation about a commission where the FOP has a voice at the table. I think that we need to have a table where everyone has a voice. And if we can't all be in one place, you know, expressing our views here, like where can we do it? This is what we're trying to create, is that forum. I know it's uncomfortable. It's not always easy to disagree. But that's the nature of policymaking and democracy. I think it's a really important principle we ought to stick to.
And I think that's well said. In my experience, I have found the best, some of the best, committees and commissions that have done the best work have started out with people that didn't agree in the very beginning. And if they, once they start to respect each other and understand each other, each person has a good reason for saying what they're saying, and it really does start to get the best work you can get, because they realize that it's not just the opinion I brought to the table, it's the opinion of the table. And so I think that's the way to go. So I think we're good with that, 3-0 on that. And then we're going to get down to the next one, which is the Reamer Amendment. About the
And for this amendment, what's attached to your packet on circles 43 to 44 is the original amendment that was, that you had reviewed at your first committee work session. And what that would do is laid out on the middle of page 4. It would add language related to the, I'm going to kind of skip over this one because there's some updated language.
Okay.
But it related to the appointments of the members. The second thing that the amendment would do is allow the commission to elect a chair and vice chair after the initial designation of chair and vice chair by the council. It would require the commission to accept correspondence and comments from members of the, that should say members of the public. Excuse me, and require the county, including the police department, to respond to commission requests for information within 30 days after receiving the request. After this packet went to print, Councilmember Reamer has been diligently working on some updated language, which was passed around. Let me know if you don't have a copy. What that would do, it basically replaces the first part of his amendment on Circle 43 that specifies that the appointees to the commission should reflect a range of ethnicities, socioeconomic status, and places of origin to reflect the racial and economic diversity of the county's communities, including religious creed, age, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, and geographic location, with emphasis on those disproportionately impacted by inequities and have an interest or expertise in policing matters. The first part of this substitute language is based off of language that was added to the council president's racial equity bill, and then Councilmember Reamer has kind of boosted that a little bit to reflect that this bill is more than just a racial equity. It's focused on the county in its entirety.
and that one I thought that and let's have the conversation, but we should add something about geographics, and that we should add something about expertise.
Sure, so in the first
Well, he says
part of
interest
it-
or expertise. He does say that already.
Yeah, the second part under 4.2, it says have an interest or expertise in policing matters. And in the first part, it would specify that the appointee should reflect the diversity of geographic location.
Okay,
So
all right, that's fine. And for the first part of that one, for to elect the commission's going to elect the chair and the vice chair after the initial designation by the council. I think we should probably put the word temporary in for the initial, because the idea being that after the first meeting or second meeting or whatever, they can, as quickly as possible, they can elect their own chair and vice chair. But I don't want someone to say, well, you know, that person's been elected by the council, therefore they're there for a year. I mean, you know, I don't think that's what that's not what we're after.
And that was my paraphrasing in the in my cover memo. The specific language about this initial designation is on Circle 43 in the middle of the page. It would say that the commission must elect a chair and vice chair from among its voting members, and then in uncodified language, there would be a paragraph saying that the council is designating the chair and vice chair until the commission elects its members.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to say, your light is on. Go ahead.
Thank you. Just in reading, I think everyone has that memo. I realized that we doubled up a little bit on some of the language, so it could be edited to be more concise and say, and places of origin to reflect the diversity of the county's communities. You could drop racial and economic diversity because it's already mentioned ethnicities, socioeconomic status, which I believe we would say is duplicative. If anyone disagrees with that, then we can leave it in. But it gets to various statuses.
Okay. Go ahead, please.
I would just say race and ethnicity being different.
They are a little different.
Yeah, they are different, and so I think including both would be good.
Okay, we can leave it as it is in front of you then.
Okay. But we are adding the word geographic somewhere.
It's already in there.
Where's geographic?
It's under I'm sorry, it's under 4.1. It's in the third line.
Orientation, gender identity, and geographic location.
Okay.
You see it?
Yep.
Okay.
You could probably still tighten this language a little bit, just to, you could add but I don't want to micromanage it. We can do that between now but I just think we should have race and ethnicity be both in there. And you could.
I have no
Tell you
problem.
what, why don't afterwards,
Yeah.
we can.
Yeah. I have no problem with that. Okay. Is everybody okay with that? Yes, that's a 3-0 and a couple others besides 3-0 plus.
For clarification's sake, is that a 3-0 on the Councilmember Freeman's entire amendment or just this first portion of it?
The entire, I think. I mean, I don't. Yeah.
I'm just trying to be as clear as that.
No, and you should be, because then you make us go back and read it a second time. So, yeah, that's good. Okay. And then I guess it's the last item is the idea about the under 25 and under 35. You know, I've had some good conversation about that one. I have no problem with the concept. But if someone is under 25, and the way we've written this is 18 to 25, if someone is under 25, and let's say they apply and they're 24 at the time, that means they're only going to be there for 1 year. So there's the question is whether or not it should say, and there's two sides to this now, but whether it should say that someone that applies for the under 25 has to be under 25 when they apply, and if they're become older than 25 during their term, they still get to stay until their term ends. Or should you say that somebody really, if you want them to be there for the whole term, they have to be under 22 or whatever, because it's a 3-year term. And it's the same problem for someone under 35, obviously. Because and there's two sides to this, but one of the concerns is, here's somebody who's been there for a year, they've really started to, in the very beginning, it takes a while to gear up and all of that, they started to know what's going on, and they then have to leave, but they're representing under 25 when they're over 25, so I'd like to have a good discussion on that, please. Go ahead.
Well, I've been thinking about this. I think it should be at the time of their appointment. They have terms, so also if they exceed the age of their category and their term is up, then they should
Different.
cycle
They
off.
can't reapply, right.
But otherwise, I think it should just be the time of appointment. I mean, if you're the right person and you're 23, you should fill the 18 to 25 slot, and then if you become 27, you're still filling the 18 to 25 slot until that term. But then, when that term is up, then at that point, you would have to be appointed as a general member or as the 26 to 35 slot. But you couldn't continue to fill, you couldn't be reappointed to that seat when you're not of the age.
Right. Will, go ahead.
I would agree with that. I think it's the time of the appointment. It's a 3-year appointment. I think it's negligible. You're still going to bring that experience with you. So I would agree with Councilmember Raymer.
Any of the committee members have an opinion on that one? You want to tell everybody you're under 25? Is that what you're going to?
I wish. No, I think just to, and this will be the prerogative of the executive, but as I mentioned last time, I think there'd be some benefit to considering somebody who's on the Commission for Youth, who has the back-end infrastructure, of a larger committee of people rather than that, because presumably we want that person to speak for youth. And having a body behind them who can provide even more support and research, I think would be helpful. But it will be the prerogative of the executive to determine whether or not he wants to pursue that, or someday she wants to pursue that. But I agree with what's been said, and I'm fine with it the way it is.
Okay. And the only other question on this one is, it was pointed out to me, whether or not we wanted to either lower the 18 or take that, just say it's someone under 25 or under 35. And there again, the question being whether or not someone who's in high school, as an example, younger than a senior in high school, whether or not we would like them to apply, or whether or not you want someone who's of voting age to be on this. So it's a conversation, please. I have a feeling you have an opinion. Go ahead.
I appreciate it. And I actually think about it, we want to be overly inclusive, not exclusive.
Yeah.
So I think under 25 would capture that. It could be you could have a high school age student be involved, and I think that'd be a good thing. So you could set a base, you could set a floor.
Right.
You could say 14 to 25.
Well, or candidly, if someone is, and there again, I don't know that whether 14 or 12 or whatever would be something that actually works. But if during the process, that would be something that we would figure out. I mean, we might have a board of education member, former student member, or a student member say, I'd like to be on this board. So that should be something considered. If, just the fact that you're below 25 doesn't mean you represent, to Gabe's point, doesn't mean you're not necessarily representing all youth. I mean, somebody if he's been on the board, they have been on the Board of Education, they were actually voted into that position, so. Okay, so are you okay with that? So we're saying under 25 and under 35.
At time of appointment.
At time of appointment, right? Everybody's in agreement with that part?
The second one, I think, is just you are distinguishing the period of 25 to 35, though.
You still want 25 to 35 on that?
I think that's, or do you want, because that's just two different things. I just want to make sure, if you say under 25, that was the intention, is that that group has a different set of experiences. So I think removing the restriction on the
first
25 one, but keeping it on the second is probably.
Okay, all right. I can live with that, too. Okay? And then, and that's everything on your memo, right? We did receive, and we just received it this afternoon, a memo from the FOP that was asking us to consider some other items. They would like us to consider that while the commission will review police policies, while the commission, I think you got it, but as I say, we just got it this afternoon. The commission, which considers the important issue of concern, while the commission will review police policies, those policies and practice determined by federal, state, and local laws should not be in the commission's purview. That's the first thing that they're talking about. I don't know. I mean, obviously, the federal we don't have authority over, and the state either. But I don't. And the local laws is something that I don't know why you wouldn't, what?
Yeah, they're advising us on those.
They're advising us on that. So I don't know about the local laws. And to me, this is an advisory commission. It's not an oversight commission. This is an advisory commission. And if someone is advising us and they don't like a state law, obviously they know that we can't do it or change it. But I don't know why you wouldn't like to have their opinion. And you ladies are talking about something. Go ahead, please.
If someone has an extra one,
Oh, I'm sorry.
just haven't seen it. Thank you.
It's kind of necessary to have it. And maybe we can't discuss it now in case, so people don't have it. Go ahead, please, Will.
I would just say, oftentimes, many laws, they interact at the federal, state, and local level, and it's hard to talk about a local law sometimes. You can't talk about personnel records, for example, without talking about MPIA, or, and it would just put whole categories of things off limits. So I don't think, kind of where you were going, giving us advice. We have our own purview of what we can influence, but I think in some senses it wouldn't make sense if they didn't reference certain things. So I don't think there should be a restriction on what they can reference, in my view.
Go ahead. You're okay on that? And then the second thing that they mention is that the commission, which is a community-based commission, should have community members and not advocacy group designees. There again, I don't know that, do we have any advocacy group designees as such? I mean, what is being considered at this point?
So the way the bill is drafted, if you look on Circle 2, lines 11 through 15, it says each member should represent a community organization operating in the county or be an individual.
Okay, and there's one more sentence I should have read on that one, and it says, therefore, no voting members of the commission should hold a position or office in any advocacy group. And to your point that you already read, I think we're okay on that. Go ahead. No? I saw you reaching.
I guess I just think I understand, I think, the intention behind some of this, but I think we're in general agreement on what the point of this whole thing is. And as important as we think this is an advisory commission in an area of law that's important, but our authority is quite restricted under state law. And, if you don't write everything into the law, but if the chair of this advisory commission wants to use the commission's time efficiently, if I were chairing it, I would want to begin the first meeting or two with a discussion of the scope of what we can talk about and what we can and can't do as county lawmakers, and advising county lawmakers, potentially advising state lawmakers or whatever, so that people don't waste their time talking about, blue sky, what they would like to see, but rather restrict their discussions to what is practical. And you don't write all those things into law. That's just sort of how the commission ought to conduct itself.
And it ends up by saying, just so everybody's aware of what this memo says, the amendments presented would provide a greater understanding on policies reviewed and transparency to Bill 1419. And as stated previously in the public hearing for Bill 1419, FOP Lodge 35 does not support Bill 1419. But I think we're okay the way that this is being set up. Is everybody in agreement that we're okay just the way it's been set up? Yeah. Silence is golden? Okay. And then here's the other question. Do we need to have this one more time in its final form before it goes to full council, just to make sure that everybody's comfortable with what you've heard, or are we fine to go to full council?
It's certainly the prerogative of the chair and the committee. Typically, we go straight to council if all the issues are handled. I can redraft. I mean, the amendments are pretty easy to draft, although if it would make you comfortable, I can certainly circulate it before it gets to council. I think the first at this time that this could go to council would really be November 19th, which gives us adequate time.
As far as I'm concerned, and everybody else is going to have an opinion, but as far as I'm concerned, if you would write it, circulate it to us, and then let it go to full council, but just to make sure. I mean, and the non-committee members too. They get to have an opinion too. just to make sure that everybody heard that we're all on this, literally on the same page. I think that's fine.
The only outstanding item, I don't know if anyone
Yeah.
has any other issues to raise, but the only outstanding issue is that you need to vote on the bill in its entirety. You've voted on individual amendments, but that last step needs
Go
to
ahead.
be taken when all the issues are resolved.
I just want to make sure, we didn't affirmatively state it, but that the 2 youth members would be out of the executive's 4.
Well, it says that.
Did we confirm that?
Yeah.
Okay, I just, yeah, okay.
So the amendment on Circle 45.
So we just accept that amendment in its entirety? Okay.
Right.
Great.
So, okay, we can vote on the bill in its entirety.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, it's 3-0. Thank you very much. That's it. We are adjourned.